Due to technical issues,
This really
presentation
interesting thing
joined in
happens,
progress.
because I'm going to measure it going the same speed I did when I was stationary, but you're going to see it going faster. Does that make sense? Very intuitive. So it's obvious that the speed that that light takes to get there would be different if I were moving. It's obvious. That's what they're trying to measure. Terrific. They had it all set up. Here's their result. There was no difference. This was like an interesting moment. So, but it wasn't failed science. Nor were these guys failed scientists. In fact, later on, Michelson was was the first American to get a Nobel Prize in the sciences for their design of instruments that could measure stuff like this. In fact, the instruments that measured gravitational waves a few years ago were built on the technology he developed. Kind of cool. And really what happened was this experiment left a hole, because it's impossible that light would not change speed based on the speed of the source. It's impossible. So then this guy came along in 1905. And he built on the work of some others like Lorentz, but he asked a simple question. Instead of saying it's impossible, what this guy said, okay, but what would happen if it wasn't impossible? And then he made a bunch of predictions that have been tested robustly for the last 100 and more years, and they've proven to be correct. So, but he wasn't an experimental scientist. He was a theoretician. He had theory. So here's my interpretation. Albert Einstein was one of those very rare thinkers that doesn't come along very often. And in his most productive years, he was not constrained by any prevailing paradigm. He could ask those open-ended questions, and then he would explore them. This gave him intellectual freedom to create a new framework versus extending the old one. Very, very rare thinkers. They don't come along very often. Even so, in his later years, he struggled with some of the paradoxes of quantum mechanics that even arose in his theories. Now, Taiichi Ohno, who is really credited with developing the Toyota production system, was a trained industrial engineer, trained in time studies. He understood the Ford system of flow in the Model T plant. And when he began implementing the Toyota production system, he had a paradigm that he was trying to make it work in his world to get this all going. He had a paradigm. So how critical is that theoretical framework to make this happen? So where do we end up? But Mark, okay, we can't just copy the tools. Everybody says that. Okay, so here's my thought. I think we may have a problem even thinking of them as tools. I say, let's think of the classic Toyota tools as instruments. They are things that tell us what's going on in our process. Michelson and Morley invented instruments to tell them what was going on in the universe. And then they could develop and learn from that. So, hello, there we go. So what are those lean tools for? What are any tools for? Well, let's take an example from the starter kata. So we establish an intended pattern for practice. Then we use that pattern as a point of comparison to the actual practice. That lets us see what we have to work on to close the gap. The intended pattern is the paradigm we're trying to match. We get data, look for differences. When we see a difference, we got work to do. Very simple stuff. That's what science is about. Now let's take a look. Now this only works when the coach understands that reference pattern and the reasons for it, and the coach can teach the reference pattern to the learner. So the coach has to have a deep understanding of the reference pattern for that to work. I don't think I'm going to get any disagreement in this room on that. Okay, I'm kind of looking to the guy in the back just to make sure. Okay, so the lean tools do the same thing. All the tools. I'm using Lean because most of us are Lean geeks, but you know, if I could plug in Six Sigma, I could plug in any other tools. It's the same conversation. They give us a theoretical framework that embeds scientific thinking into the process itself. So that process structure gives us information about how are we doing in relation to what should be happening. So let's look at the classic TPS model. A lot of us have seen this, the classic house model. You get lots of other words stuck on it. But what's really going on with that here? So what is JIT, or just in time, or a friend once told me it stands for jammed in tight when you're making work cells, right? What is just in time? Just in time, well, first at the bottom, I'm sorry. Leveling the standardization, control your variables. Let's get a standard, let's get some stability to stand on. Now, what's JIT? I'm going to hypothesize that with these resources and this time and this labor and these people and this machine and these materials, I can just make the requirement. With just the right amount, I can just make it. That's really what JIT is. JIT is a hypothesis about my process. On the other side, that fancy Japanese word, jidoka, really translates to continuously testing that hypothesis. Is it running the way it's supposed to? And now that term's been expanded from the original concept that was developed in 1920, but that's pretty much how it's implemented today. So we're constantly trying things, jargon terms like one-by-one confirmation. By the way, if you see one of these house models on the internet and the word one-by-one confirmation appears in the jidoka pillar, that slide has DNA from Genie Industries on something I put together. But it's been, just to share you with that. What do they say? Stealing from one is plagiarism, stealing from many is research. Okay, so stop and respond to any opportunity, gain more understanding, adjust your hypothesis. I put the whole thing together. All these tools are instances of doing the same thing. So here's kind of the end, okay? However you express or model your tools, or whatever tools you choose, their purpose is to give people more information that they can act upon. And so is the tools that enable the scientific thinking. So don't just go off. My thinking is don't just go off and try science by itself. Work within a paradigm, because I'm not Einstein. I'm not likely to invent a new one. And that's basically my message. Thank you.